Welcome to Books on Air, the podcast you really don't want to miss. I'm Suzanne Harris, and today you're going to get a sneak peek behind the scenes at what it's like to be an author. You're going to hear the backstory behind the book. They'll tell you who or what inspires them. You may even find out where their ideas come from. And who knows, you might even get a scoop about a new project. If you want to know more about them and more about their work, then we'll tell you where to find them on social media. Joining me today is Conrad Gren. He's a true scholar, and he's here to talk about his book, Greek/Hebrew Parallel Old Testament English Translation. Now, Conrad graduated with a Master's of Arts degree in exegetical theology from Western Seminary in Portland, Oregon. He translates Hebrew scriptures, that's Old Testament, from Greek into English and from Hebrew into English. Conrad, I am so pleased to talk to you today. You are a true scholar. I've read what you do, and I find it absolutely amazing. Welcome to Books on Air.
Well, thank you.
Now, I know that you have not always been a theological scholar. Where did this whole thing start with Greek and Hebrew and the scriptures?
Well, I've been, reading scriptures since I learned to read. It actually affected my speech at the dinner table. So wilt thou pass the butter? They said, okay, time to take the Bible away for a second or two. So I grew up and had a family, and I was really interested in the Dead Sea Scrolls, and in I'd say the mid-90s, they were released. A group of scholars was kind of keeping them under wraps, and they just kind of released them and opened them up to everybody. They had a couple symposiums here in Portland. I would listen to them in the summertime, and it's like they got me really fired up to dig deeper in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Because it's scripture that's in some cases several hundred or even 1,000 years older than any previously known copies, and that just fascinated me as to what changes could have occurred in that time and all that kind of stuff. So they encouraged me to take a few classes, and I took a few classes, and I started out with Hebrew. I would recommend you don't start out with Hebrew because it's so foreign to our way of communicating and all that you probably would rather start with Greek. But anyway, I did start with Hebrew, and I was only taking classes to get more familiar with both the Hebrew and the Greek languages. And finally, this mentor came by and said, "You actually need to declare for a degree. You've taken enough classes that's our requirement." I says, "Well, I don't want a degree. I'm just studying." And he says, "Let me give you a list of what classes are required to get a degree." And I discovered that I already had them all except for about 5 classes in theology. So I said, well, if I'm that close to a degree, I might as well just get it. So I studied some theology and some other things to go along with it. But that's how I got started. And in one of my classes, you had to know both Hebrew and Greek because the nature of the class was you're translating, a chapter out of the Old Testament or the Hebrew Scriptures from Greek and from Hebrew, and then you compare them. And they were chapters selected by the instructor, and he would illustrate how Greek culture and Greek influence influenced the Greek translation, and how that became actually how the version that the Christian church used. So really it kind of laid the groundwork for an understanding of the New Testament and that sort of thing. So anyway, I was taking this class, and I'm not wanting to cheat. I want to do my work and everything and understand it. But I went to the instructor and said, hey, where's the answer key? What book can I pick up that has these chapters already translated so I can compare my work to them? And he says, well, that hasn't been done. And I'm saying, I'm sorry, what? And he says, no, nobody's ever done that except for Origen back in, the early, 4th or 5th century. I forget what century he operated in, but a long time ago. He had a 6-column translation showing the Hebrew and the Greek. And he says, nothing's been done since then. I says, you're kidding me. He says, well, I've been watching you in class. He says, I think you should start that. And I says, yeah, right. He says, no, I'm serious. Why don't you just start and see how far you get? So, he kept on encouraging me to do that. So after the class, I started working on Genesis, and it took me about 6 years to do Genesis. And I said, so either I got to pick up the pace or start living a whole lot healthier than I have been, because I'm never going to finish it at this pace. So I learned to pick the pace up a little bit and get things done a little faster. But that's how I got started.
I find this amazing. Are you a minister? Are you connected with a church? Or is this simply scholarly research on your part because you're interested in this?
It's just scholarly research on my part. I think being a minister is a very high calling, and I have spoken, maybe given a couple sermons here and there, but I feel that that's a greater responsibility than I'm ready to shoulder, because we're talking about people's, eternal welfare, and I don't want to lead somebody down the wrong path. So, it's just interest's sake. And I do go to church. I go to 3 or 4 churches, and some of this is entirely unwarranted, because they know a whole lot more about Scripture than I do. But sometimes they get kind of nervous when they see me sitting there. They might even call me out and say, "So, Conrad, do you think that?" No, I don't. I'm not any kind of expert on. It's just but it's just human nature. But yeah, it's just personal interest on my part, and I've thought about becoming a pastor, and to be honest, that's a big responsibility. So
I agree.
I haven't done that.
Yeah, I agree. How long have you been working on this? How many years?
I think I started around 2002, 2003, somewhere in there, almost 20 years ago. Wow,
and how far have you gotten?
Well, I have translated. I've translated these 6 books: Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, and then the small ones, Ruth and Jonah and Habakkuk, to get the count up a little bit. And I've translated Numbers, and I'm nearly through the book of Daniel, which if I'd known how difficult that was going to be, I'm not sure I would have started. But I'm 2/3 of the way through, so I can't quit.
No, you can't. You're right. Now, how does this work? Do you have things? You talked about a 6-column translation. How does your translation work? How does the book work?
Well, so what I do is I use the most basic, the most straightforward, and the most authoritative versions or edition of the Hebrew Bible, and the most authoritative edition of the Greek Old Testament, and I translate them individually, chapter by chapter, and then when I finish each chapter, I go back, and my goal is to make them read as literally as possible, and to make them read alike whenever possible, so that if a given Hebrew word can mean 4 or 5 different things, usually only 1 or 2 of those is going to make sense in that passage. And then conversely with the Greek, if the parallel word can mean the same thing, I'll often use the same word to translate them both, so that a reader that doesn't know either one can say, oh, the Hebrew and the Greek here are either identical or they're very close, and in some cases, they're not even in the same county.
Wow, how interesting!
That's the goal, is to let the reader see how they compare. And I've looked at other parallel Bibles. In fact, I was just looking at one yesterday, I think it was, and they tend not to line things up like I do. I want the reader to tell at a glance, without even looking at the words, hey, there's a space, there's a white space on the Hebrew side that's not there in the Greek, and that alerts them without even reading the words. There's something missing here in the Hebrew that is in the Greek, or vice versa. And it can look like a Swiss cheese thing in some passages, but it just helps you see at a glance. Oh, I can tell these two are very similar, and then when you read the text, you can see they may even be identical in some cases. In many cases, they are. And in some cases, like, whoa, this verse got moved 5 verses down here in the Hebrew. It's still there. It's just in a different place, and that sort of thing. And it helps get a better understanding of the development of the Bible, of the Old Testament, that is, because you can see. I mean, when you're saying at the outset, there are several different editions of the Greek Bible, and several different editions of the Hebrew Bible, but I'm making sure that I'm using the ones that are recognized by authorities all over the world as being the best ones, the most authoritative ones. I really don't have time to mess with the hundreds of others that are out there.
Right. That would make it, it would be 100 years to try to translate all these if you took all of the different translations into consideration. That makes perfect sense to me.
Uh-huh.
Now, I can see these side by side, and then I know that we brought the Dead Sea Scrolls into this. And I saw the words in the description of the book, Dead Sea Scroll variants. What does that mean?
Well, sometimes the Dead Sea Scroll, like for example, the Great Isaiah Scroll has the complete book of of Isaiah from chapter 1 through the end of chapter 66. And there's I want to say about 1,300 differences between that text and the Hebrew text that we use today. In many cases, it's just a difference in spelling or, orthography, that kind of thing. But sometimes there can be a significant variant. Another example, like in Exodus, with the 10 plagues, the Dead Sea Scrolls will have sometimes an additional paragraph because God will tell Moses, okay, here's what you go and tell Pharaoh about this next plague that's coming up. And he'll give him a 1 or 2 paragraph description of what he wants him to say. And then in our Bibles, it's assumed that he says those things to Pharaoh because he goes and meets with Pharaoh, and Pharaoh gets all upset, and then the next plague starts. But this one particular Dead Sea Scroll repeats the words that God told Moses to say, and it says, and Moses told Pharaoh, and then you get the whole 2 paragraphs all over again, and it leaves no doubt in the reader's mind. Well, I guess Moses told him every word verbatim, just like he told him and tell him. And some scribe probably came along and said, we don't need all this duplication. We're going to make the reader go to sleep. So they just leave that out. So it's differences in omitted words or added words, sometimes just spelling differences, and sometimes, and in I have a chart in the back of my translation that has a column for this because I'm identifying for the reader. Does this variant make any difference in the English text? And if the answer is no, I assign it an importance number of 0 because it really has no importance. And it's grammatical things sometimes, like a masculine or feminine noun. Well, if the word is going to be translated the same in English, we don't have different words for a masculine ship versus a feminine ship, or a masculine flower or a feminine flower. That's the kind of differences there are.
That makes so much sense. And I've watched, of course, there are little shows, 30-minute, an hour on the National Geographic Channel and on the Smithsonian Channel, and they've done productions around the Dead Sea Scrolls, around the current research, around how they're preserving them. They're continuing to look to see if there are additional scrolls hidden somewhere in the desert, the same way that they found the original Dead Sea Scrolls. It's just so interesting.
Yeah, they just found some, I think it was in March or April, they found some new fragments of Zephaniah, and there were 2 books. I don't remember what they were, but they were fragments that were attached to scrolls they had previously. They had the mother scroll, I'll call it, but these little fragments were hidden in the dirt, and we went back through and sifted, and it adds up to a couple of verses in one book and a couple of verses in another book, and they can now add those passages, those fragments to to the scroll and attach it where it's supposed to be, and they use computers to sort things out, to line things up, and kind of it really helps them